excited today that I have Brieonna here with me. She is a wife and a mom. She lives down in Colorado and is actually a real estate educator. And I'm so excited to hear more about her story on how she's conquered chaos and how she sometimes feels like she's a stranger to people, but always lends an open ear. Brieonna, welcome.
Hi, thanks. I'm excited to be here.
So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what made you want to be a guest on this show? Because you have a pretty impactful story.
Yes, thank you. So I just kind of in a nutshell, Southern Illinois, met my husband, moved to Colorado about 12 years ago. We have a 7.5-year-old. I actually grew up in real estate. My mom was a realtor for 30 years, and then I got my degree in middle school science, of all things. And after that, for some bizarre reason, I got hired at a school and they put me in a first grade classroom. And so you can guess how long that lasted, because middle school science to first grade, unfortunately, it just didn't work. So
Very different.
that was right before we moved out to Colorado. And my neighbor at our first house that we rented out here was also a real estate agent. So she said, why don't you come to my office? And so I fell back into real estate, getting licensed out here in Colorado. And actually, I went to one real estate class and I walked out of it thinking that was terrible. It was so boring. And then it was like, there has to be a better way. So that is when I decided to mesh what I know, real estate, with what I love, educating. And that's sort of what led me to being in real estate education.
I love that. And your husband has had quite a where you've been able to support him and be sort of the rock for your family. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we decided in 2000, goodness, we did that back in 2018. Me being in real estate, I'm always the one that pushes the let's sell the house, let's buy the house, let's do this. The husband is always like, slow down. Anyhow, we bought a piece of land, built a home that was finished in February of 2020. And then, as we know, I say the world shut down in March of 2020. And then in April of 2020, my life really shut down. My husband was diagnosed with stage 4 colorectal cancer. Unfortunately, prior to that, it was a misdiagnosis. He was told he had a hemorrhoid and went in to get that hemorrhoid fixed and woke up and determined that hemorrhoid was in fact a tumor. That was on a Thursday. We were whisked away to Denver. Like I'd said, we're about 4 hours from Denver. So wanted to go to major hospitals and was there on a Tuesday, figured out the course of action. It was all very quick, which they warned us about because at the time he was 39. So it was a really fast process, which in hindsight was great. But I think at the same time didn't really give me a whole lot of time to process it all. I went into what I like to call autopilot. I lived, I kept the house, I worked. I actually worked too much, which was how I coped. And I'm still learning to get out of that. And it was, it was really intense. And I think sometimes do I regret, like, I don't remember my son a lot at that time. He was what happened. And I don't know if I don't remember it because that's also just, a lot of chaos when your child is that little. But adding the stress of my husband being ill, I think compacted, and I just sort of mustered through it. And, I look back and think, gosh, I wish I would have done that differently, or I wish I could have changed that. And that is why, and I know you kind of already said it at the intro, but I'm open arms to anybody that is in this same situation, just trying to navigate and figure out how can I best do this and come out, yes, I've gotten over it as far as coming out on the other side, and I have to be okay with how I handled it because that's what I did in the minute to survive. And that's what I can do. And I can't sit here and beat myself up about it. But unfortunately, some days that happens.
The mindset piece is it can be really challenging, right? Because we go into that survivor mode. And I think a lot of moms, there's various reasons why we get in that mode, but we always want to do more for other people.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have black spots in my brain too when I was in that survivor, I call it survivor mode, where you're literally just getting up and it's like every day is on repeat. You just need to get through the day. and go to sleep and then get up and you do it all over again the next day. And so it's almost like your brain just has these black holes of memory. You said that you didn't like remember much of your son at that point because you literally were just, I have to pay bills. I have to make sure my husband's okay. My kid is fed. There's a roof over his head. Like it is just pure survival. So, I mean, and like you said, it is really easy to beat ourselves up over that. But at the end of the day, I hope that we can say that your husband is healthy and your son is healthy and you guys have made it to the other side. And so, like I say to my kids, and I love this in Frozen too, I have two daughters. And so there's a song that's like the next best thing, right? So I just need to do the next right thing. And so you've gotten to that point and that's all you can focus on moving forward. You did mention that you are trying to unlearn your work habits that you got in that season of life. And you mentioned, and like we were chatting before this call started, but that you now put your cell phone in your bathroom overnight. So why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about that? Because I'm assuming that that's one of the tools that you're implementing.
It is, yes. And that is exactly, I used work as a coping mechanism. And gratefully during that time, the woman that watched our son was a retired nurse. So she was fabulous. And it was comforting knowing that I could leave her at home watching my son while my husband was in the bedroom. And I knew that if he needed anything, honestly, she would have been better suited to help him anyway, because I don't do trauma well, or like situations where you have to act quickly. I go into I freeze, like animals play dead. That's what I do. I would leave her and I would go to the office, and I didn't even have to go to the office. Like I said, that was all during the other C word, COVID, which I don't like to say that word. I went to the office even though I didn't have to. I worked at a company. I was the only paid person, so I was in an office by myself, but I needed to get out of the house. But I found that I would go to the office and then I would come home. I would make sure everybody was fed. I would get back on my computer. I remember sitting and just refreshing my email, thinking like, okay, well, someone's going to need me. There's going to be something I need to do. And I guess it's kind of a double edge because I have since left that company and I primarily work for myself. And so I think that's kind of what spawned that, because I put so much energy into it. But at the same token, I had to battle because I was working, nights, weekends, which as entrepreneurs, we do that. But I found this, I've got to, and actually it was my therapist that recognized it. And I knew it. I think I just needed someone to make me aware of Bree, you're killing yourself. Literally, you're overworking yourself. You need to take time. And I needed to take time to sort of accept, I guess I'll say, what was happening. I think, denial is a powerful thing. And I think that's also a lot of what was happening. So it has taken time for me to do that. And so I've decided, you know what, I'm just going to do small baby steps. And I think we can all agree with this. If we try to take on 4 things, we don't do any of them. Whereas if we try to take on one thing at a time, it's like, okay, I can conquer this. So that has been one of my things that have sort of started is the cell phone. Yes, I leave it in my bathroom on a charger at night. And it's really helped. Honestly, I feel like I sleep better when I wake up in the middle of the night. It's like I can't reach for something, or, I did end up getting an alarm clock as well. So I know what time it is. I use the alarm clock as opposed to using a phone, and working really hard. And I know it might sound silly, but not having my cell phone near me when we're eating dinner, and working really diligently that, shutting down my computer at 5 or 6. I know 6 seems late. Sometimes it happens. Making dinner and then not getting back on a computer at all. Or if I need to, I make sure I don't do it until after I put my son to bed. Before, I think I was kind of just continually doing it. And that's not helping him by, me sitting on an electronic all the time.
No, I agree. We definitely have dedicated screen time in our house as well. And one thing I notice, because like you, if I put my kids to bed and then I come back on my computer, sometimes I would find myself, it would be like 11 o'clock at night and I'm still in the thick of things and I'm like, oh, and then I would just sleep. So now it's like when I put my kids to bed, unless there's something that's like really, really urgent and it's only going to take me a few minutes, then I'll hop back on. But I now have a no computer after bedtime. Like I just need time to
Mhm.
unwind and relax. And I've noticed that I'm sleeping a lot better because of it, right? Like
Yeah,
our brains aren't meant to be on 24/7. We need time for, all of that buildup and that rest. And yeah, so it's great that you're doing that. I'm assuming that you're finding more balance between work and family and all of that. Um, you did touch on the fact that you see a therapist. Is that something that you're open to talking a little bit about? This is about like
absolutely.
moms and mental wellness. I myself see a
Yep.
therapist. I'm a huge, strong advocate. What made you want to start? Is that did you start it with your husband's illness, or is that something that you've done kind of
It
lifelong?
was, yeah, it was prior to that. I actually had postpartum depression that I shoved under the rug until my son was, it was around 2. And whatever, I call it postpartum. They claim that after 2 years, that's not still what it's categorized as. But anyway, that's what it was. I called my husband at work one day. I was home with our son. This is when we were building our house. So we were in different housing and this small little place. And I said, I'm done. And he was like, huh? What are you done with? And I was like, I'm leaving. And he was like, where are you going? And I was like, I'm not sure, but I'm out of here. And he was like, do not move. I'll be home. And luckily he worked 5 minutes away. So he came home and he was like, what is going on? And he knew. I mean, postpartum is pretty obvious, especially if you have, I mean, obviously he's never gone through it. He's a male. But even now myself, I recognize it in other women. It's always kind of a hard topic because it had been brought to my attention before. And I was like, I'm fine. Like I have a very good relationship. If they listen to this, don't be offended. But my parents were always very like, you can do it. You've got this. You don't need it. You don't need help. You've got it. And so I think I tried to keep that in mind. I can do this. I don't need help, whether that's help as in talking to someone or taking medication, whatever it may be. So my husband came home that day. We had a good conversation. He called my parents and I ended up, my midwife actually recommended a therapist. And at that time, I started seeing her. I did medication, which I will say was, again, not something I wanted to do, but I was talked into it. And Bree, we think that you've gotten so low that you're not even making like conscious decisions at this point. And so just try medication to try to bring you back to like a level playing field. And then let's see how it goes. And oh my gosh, they were so right. I didn't realize how low I had gotten. And so I took medication to, yes, get back to like, okay, this is how I'm supposed to function. And then I was able to wean myself off of those. And now I use natural remedies. So luckily, when my husband was diagnosed, I still had that same therapy. He was actually one of the first, probably 5 people that I called. And we still work together. And I'm so grateful for her. I recommend, I even have friends that are like, well, I don't know what I would talk about with a therapist. And I'm like, oh, trust me, you will find something. And it is amazing. I'm so grateful to things that I've learned about my childhood and just all of those things. And it really helps you. It helps me, at least when I'm going through a crappy time or I'm feeling down on myself. It's like, no, we can back out of this. Think about this. Think about this. Think about how far you've come. And it's just been monumental. And like I said, I think everybody should have a therapist. I mean, they are trained individuals. That's their job. They have scientific research as to try this and here's why. And it's a third party. So they're not judging you. And if they are judging you, I will say it took me a bit. I've talked to other therapists and they weren't the right fit. And I think that's important too. I think some people say, well, I didn't like them. Okay, go find someone else, because I promise there's somebody out there that will work for you and you will feel comfortable. So
Yeah, and I think that's a really key piece of this. I was just having a conversation with someone about this over the weekend because, therapy is so specific and it's not a one size fits all. And so just because you've talked to one therapist doesn't mean, and didn't enjoy it, doesn't mean that there isn't going to be the right person for you out there. I have my daughter was also around the age of 2 when I started to seek help. And like you, it was postpartum anxiety. And I get that it's, that 2-year mark. But when you've been suffering for 2 years and trying to do it all on your own, thinking that you can just get through it and not really understanding it, like for me, it came from a place of like fear and shame. And I was like, if I actually talk about like what I'm feeling right now, are they going to take my kids away? Am I an unfit mother? Like, or like, right? So there was this whole story that I had worked up in my head to the point where then when my husband had come home one day and I was totally losing my mind, he was like, we need to, like, there's another piece here. We need to get some extra help. And I also was on medication for a while. And it was supposed to be a short period of time. And it ended up being 7 years before I even found the ability to go off of that.
Yeah. And some people never get off of it, and that's fine too.
Totally.
The biggest reason I got off, and I'm sorry that I kind of butted in there. The biggest reason I got off was because it helped, but then it had other side effects that came along with it for me. And I tried other medications, and then one caused vertigo to an extent that I could barely function. So that was the biggest reason that I got off, was because it caused other things that then I was like, I don't know that this is worth it anymore. Absolutely. But I've had to find, I mean, I still have days like, whew, that would probably be helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned that you use holistic options now. I mean, we need to credit a lot of nutrition and holistic supplements and sunlight. And, the list goes on and on. You and I both live in the mountains. And so we have very limited sunlight in the winter. So I find that I need extra support in the winter, extra vitamin D, things like that, that can help if medication isn't a route that you want to go, or you can use that as a last resort, or you can use that in conjunction with all of these other things. But there are a ton of natural options out there that can also help.
Yes.
Amazing. So what would you say people can learn, or where can you say people can learn more about you?
So I do have a podcast you can listen to. It is called What's the Cheese, which is a pun off of my name, Brieonna. Brie is my shortened version. That is on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts. You can also find me on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Brie like the cheese 4. I'm on Facebook as Brieonna Aljets. And of course, to email me, which is brie@brieonnaaljets.com. And people are probably like, how the heck do I say that? I'm sure Sydney will put that information out there for you. But like I said, I'm always an open ear, open arms, whatever, because I remember moments at 2 a.m. when my husband was ill, thinking, how in the world am I going to get through this? And sometimes finding someone that's been through that, especially when you're in your 30s, is tough, because cancer, I feel like, is this thing that people say it affects older people. And I remember going to the hospital, and every time we'd sit in a waiting room, all of the posters on the wall, all of the pamphlets on the table were old people. And I so badly wanted to be like, you guys really need to change this. I mean, there's so much childhood cancer, and it's unfortunate. Everybody deals with it. It's not just old people. So
yeah, cancer definitely does not discriminate. And so if you had one last piece of advice for for the moms that are listening, what would that be?
My biggest thing that I've been working on recently is going back to the basics, keeping things simple, not overwhelming myself, not, and that is one thing I tell myself. I worked on it. Kept telling myself, I don't do overwhelm. I don't do overwhelm. And I did it once. And I will tell you, it has made a huge difference, because how can I make this simple and easy and not overthink it?
I love that. That's great advice. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Brieonna. I've loved our conversation. We have so much in common. You guys, I will drop all of those links that Brieonna mentioned under the show in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Conquering Chaos, and we will help you conquer the chaos one day at a time.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney.
Bye. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I will.
Our stories are very, very similar. Like, there was so much that you were saying today that I was like, yep, check, check, check.
And I think it's actually similar for a lot of people. I just think people don't